So for the lecture itself is going to be entirely in character. You all are, of course, muted on the voice channel itself, but you will be able to use the text channel to ask questions at the end. Also, I recommend keeping an eye on the text channel since I will be posting a few pictures representing drawings or photos or specimens that Salamander shows you. And with that, I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Salamander Harrison. Most of my colleagues call me Sal. I'm the chief geologist for 7 Glade Ecological Institution here at Crooked Heights. A few of you have met me and helped out with some of our soil sample collection. For everyone else, I hope you have at least been keeping yourselves apprised of the conditions updates that Dorothea and I have been working on. Regardless, I would like to thank you all for your continued support of 7G. As a bit of a treat and a thank you, I'm going to share some intriguing discoveries made by our paleontological and zoological research teams. Specifically, we've found several skeletal specimens of possible common ancestry to some of the diverse wildlife here at Crooked Heights. Judging from the volume of research you all conducted, I know many of you were rather captivated by the paradise aqua snails that were everywhere a few months ago. Of course, we now know that these were a non-fertile mutation of a species called the paradise porcelain snail. They don't have the bright blue coloration of the mutants, and they don't gather in such large numbers. But otherwise, their behavior is quite similar. They're a terrestrial mollusk, mostly feeding on algae, fungi, and lichen. Now, for me, as a geologist, the really interesting thing about snails is the composition of their shells. Snail shells are secreted by the organism as it grows and are composed mainly of calcium carbonate. Because of this, they're much more likely to be preserved than any of a snail's soft parts. In large concentrations, these shells and similar structures of other organisms can crystallize over time and create something we call fossiliferous limestone. Here is a specimen of fossiliferous limestone that you can take a look at yourself. You can see the various different kinds of shells in there. Once our probes go beneath topsoil, we find this kind of limestone throughout the Paradise Isles. This stuff is porous, so it explains a lot about the vulnerability of the area to sinkholes, honestly. Next up, we have the walking muckfish. Here's a copy of our informational page on that thing. These freshwater fish are around 35 to 45 centimeters long and have a projectile sac, which they can fill with mud and use as either an offensive or defensive weapon, blinding both prey and predators. Their brown-green coloration makes them well suited as an ambush predator, burrowing into the muddy bottoms of shallow ponds. Their fins are rigid, allowing them to almost walk across muddy ground. Now, dissection of dead specimens has indicated they do not possess lungs, like some other so-called walking fish. But their speed over mudflats allows them to quickly find a new territory if the old one dries up or prey becomes scarce, for example. 7G paleontologists have found a very interesting skeleton that looks remarkably like both the walking muckfish and the archer muckfish, which is more of a brackish water species. Based on the location of its discovery, this was likely a marine organism, and the exact relation between the three is still unknown. But here is the skeleton that we've been able to reconstruct of that particular specimen. It's smaller than our current muckfish, only about 20 centimeters long, but you can still see the rigid pectoral fins. The overall shape of the skeleton implies a similar ambush predator strategy to the extant muckfish species. We've also encountered a species of iguana here at Crooked Heights. Let me pass around our informational page on that. They prefer rocky outcroppings. Their skin color and texture makes them very difficult to spot when motionless. This camouflage, along with a territorial nature, have made direct observations of their behavior a challenge. With help from some of you, we were able to get a stomach sample, which indicated an omnivorous diet, combination of plants and insects mainly. However, we don't understand their specific feeding methods or behaviors. We don't recommend approaching these, as they tend to congregate in groups, and the sampling team witnessed their tails gouging out large slashes from solid rock. There is no doubt it could do the same thing to flesh and leave a nasty wound. Now, let me see. There's a note here from one of our herpetologists that lizards aren't measured from tip to tail, but rather snout vent length, the distance between the nose and the cloaca, the opening used for both excretion and reproduction in reptiles and birds. This is apparently a more accurate way to measure growth rate. We don't have a precise measurement yet for these iguanas, but visual estimates indicate a predicted SVL of about 50 centimeters. Adding the tail could easily double that length or more. Now, the first clue that we were finding related skeletons to these iguanas was actually in the teeth. As you can see, it has a very unique tooth shape with serrated edges. I suspect it could deliver a vicious bite if it wanted to. With only the bones, it's difficult to say how different this skeletal iguana was from the grayish rock-dwelling ones we have here at Crooked Heights. It's conceivable that different species would have different colorations, ranging from brown to green to black, depending on which environment they ended up occupying. Whichever one gave them the best camouflage at the time would be more successful there. Next up is the club-tailed snapping turtle. It is a large freshwater turtle with a nasty disposition, especially when out of the water. We've got another informational sheet on them that I'll pass around. They spend a lot of time resting on lake beds, so detailed study of the local population has been difficult. Turtle size is usually measured by the length and width of the carapace, the top part of the turtle shell. Curved carapace length can easily reach over 1 meter. From smaller turtle species, we know the carapace is actually a modified rib cage. Turtles are the only known group of animals to have their shoulders and pelvis inside their ribs. Like birds, turtles possess a beak instead of teeth, though my colleagues tell me this is due to convergent evolution rather than direct descent. As reptiles, turtles need to breathe air, and so must also lay their eggs on land. Though I can think of few possible predators for an adult of this species, the eggs and hatchlings are thankfully much more vulnerable. Given that individuals can easily live up to 80 years and lay nests of up to 50 eggs every year, probably the only thing that keeps the population of these giants in check. Now, we've located a few skeletons of possible ancestors to the clubtail, all of them smaller, carapace length from 35 to 80 centimeters. Here's one of them. They also don't possess the prominent bony mass at the end of the tail, which could probably shatter your leg if it connects. Measurements based on muscle attachment points of the skull give us an estimated bite strength of around 1,000 psi. Because of their increased size, it's likely that clubtail bite strength could be twice that high or more. Tucker, one of our zoologists who compiled a lot of these data for us, got bitten by one a while back. I'm told his hand bones crunched like dry pasta. Many of you are aware of the common moorhen, commonly called the swamp chicken. Some of you may have even used those infernal whistles. I swear, if one of our people invented those, they're going to get a smack upside the head if I find them. Sorry. I started talking to myself. Where was I? Yes. Now, my ornithologist colleagues insisted that I clarify to you all that these are not, in fact, actually chickens. Chickens belong to the pheasant family within the larger group of landfowl known as galliforms. Moorhens, on the other hand, belong to the rail family within a group called gruiforms, and the resemblance to chickens is merely surface level, etc., etc., etc. Interesting thing to note, compared to the other wildlife here at Crooked Heights, it appears that these birds have remained physically similar to their earlier counterparts. We've found moorhen skeletons that we know are not recent, though we can't be sure exactly how old they are. And there might be a small size difference, but hardly of statistical significance. As for the mobbing behavior we've seen in response to moorhen calls, moorhen calls and suddenly an entire flock of them descends. It's difficult to puzzle out group behavior dynamics from skeletons. So that one will just have to remain a mystery, I guess. Last month, the abundance of mutated frogs attracted flocks of predatory wading birds, dubbed by some of you as the silver daggeret, apparently a portmanteau of dagger and egret. Their non-mutated cousins are entirely white, without the silver highlights. And both of them stand about 1.2 meters tall. Now, we found several different skeletons of wading birds from different species. This one here is about as tall as our egrets. Some are much smaller, only about 45 centimeters in height. Now, the mutation of the daggerets caused something we've never seen before in birds at 7G. Either extant or skeletal. Their necks elongated. When retracted, the mutants were as tall as their normal counterparts, but at full extension, it more than doubled their total height. It's just completely insane. Our zoologists are still working on an explanation for how this occurred, though it's certainly provided an improvement to their already formidable hunting prowess. The mutant frogs were just devoured in almost no time at all. I hope you all enjoyed this little presentation. Several of our researchers worked hard on putting together the information and making some of the connections between our current wildlife and some of these skeletal remains. As with all of our efforts here at 7G, we're going to continue studying the evolutionary connections between our current wildlife populations and their ancestors. As always, your continued support of our research in this and other areas is greatly appreciated.